I was thrilled to conduct a two-part interview with Dr. S. Michael Wilcox. Michael is one of the most brilliant educators I've ever listened to, and many people consider him one of their top sources of inspiration. He's offered several wonderful books, including When Your Prayers Seem Unanswered, What Scriptures Teach Us About Raising a Child, and Sunset, which he wrote for his late wife, Lori. Dr. Wilcox holds a PhD in educational philosophy from the University of Colorado and also educates on tours around the world with Fun for Less tours. I had the opportunity to get to know Michael during trips to Australia and Antarctica, which took place during an extremely difficult period following the passing of Laurie. Even then, I found him to be a man of endless faith, kindness, and humor, despite the circumstances. I hope you enjoy this first part of the conversation with S. Michael Wilcox. I am thrilled to have you join us, Michael. How would I introduce you? You told me a little while ago the Father introduced the Son with no more than seven
That's right.
seven words.
Whenever people ask me, how do you want to be introduced? I always tell them, the Father introduced the Son in 7 words. This is my beloved Son.
That was it.
Hear him.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So I would feel bad if it took more than 7 words to introduce me.
Yeah, because then that changes the elevation there.
It changes the elevation. I don't want to compete with Jesus.
Right, exactly. Well, in some of those 7 words, you've been a friend for a long time through some work that we both do at Fun for Less. I'm in the office working in certain ways, and you are...
I live on the road.
On the road, seeing every corner of every continent in the world. It's wonderful. So our conversation today would be 3 questions. One, what do you think is creating more of a draw toward a belief in a infinite force or the universe? Different things that are
non-personal.
A non-personal kind of relationship with whatever they're feeling exists. I guess the broad vernacular would be higher power.
Okay.
But that gets broken down into other, infinite consciousness, force, different things. Why do you think, so that's the first question, why do you think people are more drawn to that nowadays than they historically have been to a personal God? The second question is, what has been your personal faith journey? What has made you believe in God, and especially a personal God? And then finally, I think my most favorite subject nowadays, seeing so many people make what they call a deconstruction of their faith. That's a very popular phrase right now. I want to be able to talk about the possibility of reconstructing their faith and what the benefits of organized religion possibly are to our souls. Yeah. So those are the 3 topics, and love to hear everything and anything you have to say about all 3.
Okay. Well, maybe we look at them individually, and if we get off, you control the conversation as you want to control it. I'm happy to engage in some other questions or clarifications. On the first one, impersonal, three thoughts maybe come to me, three perspectives. The first one's a little tougher, so I might as well get the tougher one out first. I learned it from C.S. Lewis. I did my dissertation on Lewis, so I have a tendency to quote him probably more than maybe I should. But, he was engaged in religion when he was young. And then he gave it up. He became an atheist. Or as he liked to say, I didn't believe God existed, and I was mad at him for not existing. So if you believe in a personal being, you have to engage with a personality, an individual. You don't have to engage with a force. You can ignore a force. You can ignore the spirit of the universe or an impersonal God. You don't have to obey it. It's there. You can acknowledge it.
kind of off to the side.
It's off to the side. Yeah, it's easier to not need to communicate with that being. So Lewis tells a little story in the Chronicles of Narnia about his own life. He wrote a whole thing called Surprised by Joy, which also dealt with his life. But in this story, there's a young man named Shasta, and he kind of represents Lewis and this experience in Lewis's life when Lewis tried very hard to ignore God. For him, when he was younger, God was the landlord, always coming for the rent. And since he grew up in Belfast in Northern Ireland, the landlord was not somebody you liked, okay? And there's always the rule book, that was God, the landlord for the rent, giving you the rules that you had to keep. And he gave it up with relief. He just gave it up with relief. But he felt through most of his life that God was, I wouldn't want to use the word stalking, but that God was always hanging in the corner waiting for him.
Yeah.
And so in this little story in The Horse and His Boy, Shasta is crossing a high mountain in the clouds and the mist, and as he's had a lot of bad things happen to him, he thinks. And as he's crossing the mountain pass, he senses something next to him walking in the darkness and the mist. And he's afraid, he's nervous, and he tries to get this old horse to go faster, and of course it won't go much faster. And pretty soon he hears something breathing next to him. And that distresses him even more. And finally, in desperation, as he tries to get away, this thing in the mist, this unseen thing, this presence that he senses, but doesn't know what it is and can't define it. Finally, he calls out to it, "Who are you?" And it's Aslan, and if you know the Chronicles of Narnia, Aslan is the Christ figure, this great lion, the Lion of Judah. And Aslan answers, "I am one who has waited a long time for you to speak to him." And that was kind of Lewis's life, this sense, okay, it's all right that you sense there's something up there. It's better than sensing there's nothing up there. You can begin by sensing there's something up there.
It's good.
Whether you're going to call it, what you want to do is we got to find out what it is, and is it personal or not?
Yeah.
Like I say, for Lewis, it was easier that it was impersonal. For most people who, it's just easier not to engage. Mm-hmm. But God wants to engage. If he's there, he wants to engage. We are his children. But he waits. He does wait. And Lewis, finally, I think it was 1929, he'd been wrestling with his ideas about God, and he was a good friend of Tolkien. Tolkien was Catholic, a very committed Catholic. Mm-hmm. And Lewis said, "I finally knelt in Magdalen College there in Oxford and admitted God was God. Perhaps the most dejected convert in all of England." And then he makes this little point that he didn't realize at the time the divine humility that would accept a convert on that level. He didn't come willingly, humbly on his knees, asking for forgiveness or mercy or help in trial. He came kicking and screaming and looking for every way to escape. And God accepted him like that anyway. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I think of that is sometimes it is just easier to ignore impersonal thing. You can't ignore a person, a being, especially one who is interested in you, who walks in the darkness waiting for you to talk to him. So that's kind of the first thought I'm thinking. Now,
and I wanted to comment just a bit on when you were describing that image of Aslan walking near Shasta. It comes down to me to trusting our senses, because even as you were describing that, I was Shasta, sensing the reality of a very personal being next to me. And in the final analysis, that's all we have, is either we're going to sense it or we're not.
Right.
Yeah.
We need to open up to it. Now, I think another reason is I call it the paradox of the two impossibilities. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by the paradox of the two impossibilities, and then we'll talk a little more about that if you want, is sometimes in my life I have found, you talk about a personal faith journey, there are times where it just seems impossible to believe in a benevolent, good, all-powerful, all-knowing God. Mm-hmm. There are times I look up to heaven and I say, who is running the universe, Lord? Look at what is going on down here.
Right.
And that's kind of the second thing that we go from Lewis to Shakespeare. And Shakespeare, like many people in the scriptures and all through history, they wrestle with this acceptance of a benevolent, good, caring, all-powerful God. It's the problem of monotheism, that you look at the way the world is and you look at the possibility that God can do what he wants to do, and he doesn't seem to do what you and I think he ought to do. Mm-hmm. Okay? Mm-hmm. So Shakespeare has a number of moments in the plays where he poignantly questions God. In Macbeth, when Macduff's wife and children have been murdered mercilessly by Macbeth, and he's just heard about it. If it's acted well, he looks up to heaven and he cries out, "And did heaven look on and would not take their part?" In Richard III, when Richard III kills his two nephews, again, children, the suffering of children is a big deal in a lot of world literature. Mm-hmm. So when Elizabeth of York learns that her two sons are dead, she, again, if it's acted well, looks to heaven and says, "And wilt thou, O Lord, throw such innocent lambs into the jaws of the wolf?" When did heaven sleep when such a deed was done? Even in Romeo and Juliet, Juliet has a great line. They're all over Shakespeare, where she says, "Is there no pity sitting in the clouds that looks into the bottom of my grief?" So part of the challenge I've had to wrestle, I still wrestle with it, mm-hmm. is pain and suffering and why God doesn't intervene or why he does intervene sometime. So I am troubled by Acts chapter 5, which is the story of Ananias and Sapphira, and they lie about how much of a donation they made, and they both are struck dead. And I read that and I say, Lord, I can give you a list of some other people you ought to strike dead in the history of mankind. So why are you taking out two people who lie at over a donation, and you're not taking out somebody who causes a Holocaust? That I could just come up with. I got my list of suggested heart attacks for God. All right. So sometimes these things people wrestle with. A personal, engaging, I'm interested in you, I love my children, God, which is the affirmation of certainly monotheistic Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, does create some problems. And for somebody who's maybe had personal experiences in that, or they look around the world and they wonder, it is hard for them to engage and continue to believe in a benevolent, loving, caring God. There's lots of suggested answers to that. That's a whole other conversation.
Right. Problem with pain.
Problem of pain and everything. But there's no sufficient answer, because if there was a sufficient answer, the question would go away. We'd say, well, this is the answer. Okay, now I understand.
Yeah.
But because the question has continued to be asked and has been asked for thousands of years, and I still ask it.
How would you actually...
I've never had a good answer.
How would you actually summarize the question? If we were to put that question in one sentence, what would it be? The question is...
Oh, I think the question is, as a benevolent, good, loving, caring Father God, and you can't avoid the Father God concept because Jesus teaches that strongly. He's our Father. He's always calling him our Father. How can a Father God allow what happens, particularly to children? An adult it's a bad defense to suffering. All of Buddhism is developed, the Buddhists, to try and understand suffering. An adult has a negative defense to suffering we call hate. Hate is a defense. There's that scene in Ben-Hur where Ben-Hur is chained to the oar and they're trying to break him, and the Roman consul comes and he says, "There is hate in your eyes, number 41. That's good. Hate will keep a man alive." Okay? But a child can't hate. See, child has no defense. So I don't know if that answers. I didn't give it to you in one sentence. The standard is, why does the good God allow bad things to happen to people?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I suppose that for me, it kind of backs itself up into another question, which is, what's God's objective? What is he trying to accomplish, and how is he trying to accomplish it? You have to kind of look at all those questions to kind of...
You do. I think Job is not for me, is not a sufficient answer. But the second question Job asks is an important question. And, the typical Job question is, why does God allow bad things to happen to really good people?
Yeah.
But the most important question of Job is the accusation Satan makes when he visits God, and he says, "Your children, those who claim to love you, only do so because everything is going good in their lives. But you start letting negative things happen to them, and they will curse you. They will abandon you." And the lovely thing about Job is that God shows confidence in the human family. He says, "I don't think so." Lucifer is called the accuser. His greatest accusation is, they only love you because righteousness pays. Look what you've done. Okay.
But that's so true, though. There's so much truth in that.
Sir Thomas More says that if every good deed always got an immediate positive benefit, self-interest would make us all saints. But as we see that it's the other way around, we have to exercise faith. Okay, we have to exercise faith. And God is saying, I think my children will pass your test. You do what you want with them. I think they'll continue to believe and love me. They'll wrestle, they'll struggle, but in the end, your accusation is going to prove false.
Now you mentioned that Job's treatment of this question wasn't completely satisfying to you. Did you?
I do say that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and tell me just a little bit more about that.
If we're going to get into Job.
I love Job.
The whole Job is a dialogue. It's a literary form. How much of Job is historical narrative is debated. But at the end, God gives the answer. Job's friend's answer is that negative things happen to people because they deserve it. Hey,
that's so crazy.
So you have to look at your life, find out where you sin, correct your sin. God's forgiving; He's merciful. But whatever bad happens to you is essentially your fault because God has to stay just. Okay, and Job is arguing against that whole concept. And then God comes at the end and He gives Job an astronomy, biology, botany test on creation. And asks him question after question after question, that, of course, Job can't answer. A lot of us can't answer with all our knowledge today. We can't answer those questions. And the implication is God is saying, well, I can answer all these questions. I know all these things about the weather patterns in animals and birds and things under the sea. I know them all. So you have to trust me a little bit. I know what I'm doing with my children. I know what I'm doing with people also. You just don't understand, so you just have to trust, which is an answer, okay? But for me, it's not totally satisfying as an answer because I have Ananias and Sapphira, and I have Uzzah, who steadies the ark.
That was a bad day.
He's struck down too. Okay? Now, at least I can hear God saying to Uzzah in the next life, welcome to my kingdom. I cut your life short a little bit, but it's going to create a marvelous expression, don't steady the ark.
I know.
But anyway, there's those kinds of questions.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting.
So the third thing, then we go to Paul. So we did a little bit of C.S. Lewis, a little bit of Shakespeare in this question. So people do wrestle with the idea of an engaging personal God who takes an interest in us when you look at the things that are around you. Mm-hmm. And the paradox of two impossibilities come. Sometimes it's just impossible to believe, and then other times wonderful things happen. You see the goodness of people, you see the beauties of creation, the order, the moral sense in humanity. There are just so many things where you say, how is it possible to disbelieve? Mm-hmm. And we kind of run back and forth between these two impossibilities. It's impossible to believe, it's impossible not to believe.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So Paul gives us another thing. Eventually, then, faith is a choice. Mm-hmm. Faith is a gift. It's a gift of the Spirit. My mother had it. I did. Okay? I believe. But I also have a questioning mind. And those two have some very interesting conversations with each other. Mm-hmm. So it's a gift. Some people just have the gift of faith. And it's wonderful that they have the gift of faith. Not everybody does. Mm-hmm. So here's my Paul take on it. Now, faith is the substance. Ooh, I like that word.
Oh, I love that too. I've always loved that word in there. Yeah.
And another interpretation of the Greek could be faith is the assurance. Mm-hmm. Substance is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Mm-hmm. Now, most people aren't going to grasp always the reality that faith is based on evidence, substance. So in my mind, when I look at that in Paul, and for LDS people, Alma the Younger says something similar. He's also going to use the word evidence. So visualize a pyramid, okay? One of the most stable structures, building structure is a pyramid. They're still around. Okay, they just last a long time. Hard to knock them down. You can dislodge a few stones here or there, but a big stone pyramid. So faith, in my mind, is a pyramid. And I'm going to divide it into 3 sections. And on the top section, we can call that faith, what I believe, what I affirm to be true. Okay? That's the top of the pyramid. But it's supported by, Paul would say, but underneath that top, what I believe, Paul is saying you got to support it. And what supports it? Evidence supports it. Now, the bottom thing, the lowest level of the pyramid, the broad foundation, well, what supports evidence? And evidence is supported by, let's say, 3 things. Experience. So my experience provides the evidence for what I affirm to be true and good. Experience. Authority. My experience, I've not had it, but I trust the authority of other people who do know. Yeah. Religious sense, their prophets, scripture, what authority. We all have to have faith in other people's knowledge.
Right.
to live our lives. We wouldn't do anything without understanding that there are people who know more than we do or have had different experiences. And so I just trust the authority of. That's my evidence. Mm-hmm. The third is reason. My reason tells me these things are true. Mm-hmm. There's a section with Alma the Younger where he's battling Korihor who believes in nothing. And he challenges them, first of all, to say, what evidence do you have there isn't a God and that he's not personal? You don't have any evidence. I love that he turns the table on him, And then he gives his evidence. And in his list of evidences for his belief in a personal, engaging God is all three of those. He has reason, authority, and experience.
Right.
So if the top says, I know or I believe this, the lower two levels say, and I know why I believe it. And it is always helpful for people to go to the bottom part and say, what evidence do I have based on reason, authority, experience? Now, there may be other things down in that foundation that supports what I believe. So a lot of our efforts trying to move from that presence in the mist walking by us that wants to engage to know that it's an individual being, or we're looking for evidence. We experiment. We try to create evidence. And there's an inner way of getting it created, and there's an outer way of getting it created. So the inner way, Jesus said, if you live it, you'll know.
Yeah, that's always been an overarching pointer to me. In other words, anyone who will do these things will know and sense the validity of the claims and of the principles associated with the claims.
Yeah.
And that's been like a compass for me. Just, you have very little to lose by actually doing the things that are talked about in scriptures.
And there's some great places, I pulled one up on the phone in case we went here.
Yeah.
There's one, George MacDonald. I love George MacDonald.
Yeah.
Congregational Scottish minister, C.S. Lewis's mentor. Mm-hmm. He had a wonderful concept of a very loving, engaging Father God. It's hard to read George MacDonald and not love the man and not love the God that he worships.
Yeah.
But he says, just go and do it. You got doubts, you got one. He says, just go and do anything he told you to do. Just go out and do. Pick something he told you to do. Be a peacemaker. Be meek. Forgive somebody. Love your neighbor. Be a good Samaritan. Right. Just go do anything he tells you to do. That's McDonald's, and you'll come to some conclusions. The other one, and I pulled it up here, is Dostoevsky. I really like Dostoevsky. Mm-hmm. He wrote The Brothers Karamazov to kind of defend a traditional view of a loving God versus a more general force. That in the late 1800s, you've got Darwin coming out, you've got Freud, you've got Marx. You've got a lot of things that are challenging traditional Christianity. Not that traditional Christianity didn't need to be challenged in some things. Mm-hmm. There are some blocks on the pyramid that need to be shaken occasionally, and they roll off because they never belonged there in the first place. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's one of those. You talk about the second question you want, my own faith path. Part of it has been to realize that occasionally life and God has to knock some things off of my pyramid of faith that probably never should have been there anyway, or maybe they were scaffolding to hold it up till I get the more solid things in place.
Yeah, I like the way you put that.
So anyway, here's from the Brothers Karamazov. A woman has come to Father Zosima, who is this beautiful Eastern Orthodox priests, and she's lost her faith. She had it as a girl. She's lost her faith. And so she wants to know how she can prove there's a God and have that again. How can it be proved? And Father Zosimus says, one cannot prove anything here, but it is possible to be convinced. How? By what? By the experience of active love. Try to love your neighbors actively and tirelessly. The more you succeed in loving, the more you'll be convinced of the existence of God and the immortality of your soul. And if you reach complete selflessness in the love of your neighbor, then undoubtedly you will believe, and no doubt will ever be able to enter your soul. This has been tested. This has been proven. This is exactly true. I think we sometimes go backwards. I'm going to believe in God, then I'm going to go out and love my neighbor. And he's saying, no, you go out and love your neighbor. You go out and do good, and your understanding, your belief, your engagement, the mist will clear, and you're going to see who's been walking next to you along the path all along that you didn't think was personal. And that kind of deals with the second. The first is I live it. That's the inner. That's me. That's how I'm going to find out. But there's an outer way also. You look at other people who do believe, and this is where we can fail the world, the believing in the personal God. The religious community can, because sometimes people are turned off by religion. I've sometimes organized religion.
Oh, that's for sure.
I've sometimes said there isn't anything as effective as religion in shutting the brain down from thinking and the heart from feeling. In the history of religion, people have done unthinkable, just downright evil things. They're still doing it, and they're doing it in the name of God. You're going to murder, torture, burn people at the stake, launch wars. I mean, religion does not have, in a lot of ways, a really, really good history in some sense. Thoreau has a little thing. He says he bears this kind of beautiful testimony. I'm not sure I can remember it. I know that I am, he says, I know that another is who knows more than I, who takes an interest in me, whose creature I am, and yet in some sense whose kindred I am. I know the enterprise is worthy, meaning life and creation. I know that things work well. I have heard no bad news.
Yeah.
So that's his testimony of Christianity and his belief and his faith.
Yeah. There's two things I wanted to add to that. One is I'm inspired by this, again, going back to this initial image that you gave of that walk near Aslan. Organized religion is an opportunity to walk by so many others that are walking by Aslan, and to be able to hear their voices in your community saying, yeah, I'm sensing that too. And when we compare with each other what we're sensing, then something starts forming in a more palatable, dynamic way inside of us because we're exchanging that experience with each other.
Yeah, if you want to kind of look at that third question, organized religion does have an ability in focusing us outward and giving us outlets and opportunities to serve, to engage with others. It also gives one a great support system. My wife passed away 14 years ago. This great tragedy, great sadness, great grief that I still feel.
Yeah.
And I was grateful. I used the word tarry and watch, when Jesus goes into Gethsemane, you notice he takes 3 people with him, Peter, James, and John, because he needed the human element. He needed somebody. He had his Father. He had the Spirit. But he wanted a human voice, a human presence. And so he says to them, my soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. Tarry ye here and watch with me. And during my time of life, when my soul was exceeding sorrowful, even unto death, it's very easy to say, yeah, there's no personal God, and I don't need organized religion, until you get to a point where your soul is exceeding sorrowful, and you just sometimes want somebody around you. And I had a lot. We know mutually some of those people. A lot of people who tarried with me and watched with me. I'm grateful I was part of an organization that tarried and watched with me in that time. You know, you've been through some challenging times in your life.
That's for sure.
You're going to have tarrying, watching friends who are selfless.
I want to pause on that tarry concept because, I never really thought of that until you said that right now, that Jesus, the Son of God, the Son of Man, the God himself on earth, even he needed someone to just be there. So I think when it comes to church, being part of a church organization, locally in my neighborhood, to go to church with them. I saw Brene Brown talk once, I think it was in Washington, D.C., from the Church of England, big cathedral. And to hear her say, at the time she wasn't even going to church, but she said, guys, we need this. We need to sing with each other.
Yeah.
And shake each other's hand and pray together. And so when you use the expression, tarry with me, I think to bring that now down to just the rest of us and say, guys, just to even walk in the doors of church and just see that you're still alive and that you're witnessing my life, even if it's in a somewhat casual way, that we're able to acknowledge each other in the foyer or in the hallways. And
right. Yeah. You see that in Gethsemane 2 times. Luke says an angel comes to strengthen him. But twice in Gethsemane, he leaves where he's praying and goes out to see who? His tarrying, watching friend. Now they're asleep, and sometimes we got to be careful that we don't go to sleep on each other. We want to be awake. But that would indicate he needed the human voice, the human touch, the human presence, because he goes out twice to see them. Wakes Peter up, and then goes back in, asks him again to pray, and why are you sleeping? And then he goes, so twice he does that, and that's an indication. I think maybe a third thought on religion. Today there's a lot of distrust, especially among younger people, of institutions. It's not just Latter-day Saints or Catholics or whoever people are leaving or disengaging. There's just a general institutional distrust. Government, business, religions. There's just we're leery of them. Okay, sometimes with good reason. Sometimes it's just we breathe it in the air that's part of our world. The other thing is sometimes people say to me, I don't need an organized religion. Mm-hmm. And I never argue with them. I always say, you're probably right. What does that have to do with it? You're needed. I could probably go hike in the woods on Sunday and feel you don't engage for what you're going to receive. You engage to give something. And, I go to Paul again, and everybody gets a gift. Everybody gets a spiritual gift. He talks about the bodies, and that the eye can't say to the feet, I don't need you. So nobody in your parish or your ward can say, we don't need the Smiths over there. What do they do? Okay. Everybody's been given a gift.
Yeah.
And nor can the hand say, well, because I'm not the eye, I'm not necessary. So you can't say, well, they'll never miss me. Everybody has something to give. And sometimes just your presence,
Yes.
sitting in a chair, like you say, singing with them and just talking in the foyer or whatever, you are contributing something.
I love how you put it in that one conversation. That bears repeating just in this recording, and that is that essentially, yes, you don't need it, but what you do need is to fulfill what you can give to others. You're needed. I was talking to somebody yesterday, a very good friend of mine who doesn't go to church anymore, and I said, there are people in your neighborhood that need you. She said, well, I don't have anything to offer. She's kind of down on herself right now. Right, yeah. I said, no, you do. I said, here's what you have to offer. You have you to offer. Right. Yeah. You go to your local church and you just look somebody in the eye, just that little connection, so that person feels seen by you. And you don't think you have much to offer? Thanks for joining me in part 1 of my conversation with Michael Wilcox. To wrap things up, Spencer Kimball once said that God watches over us, but it is usually through someone else that he meets our needs. Before recording this today, my wife and I had the wonderful opportunity to visit one of our neighbors in the hospital, a neighbor that I might not have ever come to know if it wasn't for our affiliation in our local church. And my wife felt really strongly that I should sing this song by Roger Hoffman, Consider the Lilies, just to give them a little comfort with respect to what they've been going through. I'm thankful for these opportunities. I'm thankful that I'm needed, and I'm thankful I can reach out to others when I'm in need.
Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow, how they grow. Consider the birds in the sky, how they fly, how they fly. He clothes the lilies of the field, he feeds the birds in the sky, and he will feed those who trust him and guide them with his eye. Consider the sheep of his fold, how they follow where he leads. Though the path may wind across the mountains, he knows the meadows where they feed. He clothes the lilies of the field, he feeds the birds in the sky, and he will feed those who trust him and guide them with his eye. Consider the sweet, tender children all of them he carried from the day of his birth. He clothes the lilies of the field. He feeds the lambs of his fold, and he will heal those who trust him and make their hearts as gold. He clothes the lilies of the field. He feeds the lambs of his fold.